welcome to Bi Guys. Happy Bi Visibility Day. It is September 23rd. I'm releasing this episode early as a special treat for Bi Visibility Day. Happy Bi Awareness Week. Happy Bi Month. Happy Bi Day. It's bisexual everything. I'm really excited for today's guest. I've been trying to get her on the podcast for a while now, and she is the perfect guest to have on Bi Visibility Day. I think you're all going to enjoy it. That is all I wanted to say for this intro, so without further ado, enjoy the episode and happy Bi Day. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bi Guys. We have another incredible interview for you today. I'm very excited to talk to my guest. It's keeping in the theme of the Los Angeles season of Bi Guys. I've moved west and I'm joining this lovely community out here and bringing them all into the fold of Bi Guys. My guest today, I'm very excited. I've known about her for a long time, and we finally got to meet a few weeks ago. She's an internationally recognized psychologist, educator, author, and grassroots activist, specializing in the LGBTQ+ and Asian Pacific Islander communities. Since the 1990s, she has co-founded 3 organizations in Los Angeles for Bi+ individuals, including the LA Bi+ Task Force and AmBi Los Angeles, which I have been going to some of the events and having lots of fun. She has authored multiple publications and launched the Bi on Life self-empowerment series. She earned a seat at the landmark 2013 White House Bisexual Community Roundtable, and she was named one of the most significant women in the bisexual movement. I agree. She currently works as the interim coordinator of training at Loyola Marymount University and clinical supervisor of the LGBTQIA+ Affirmative Therapy Center at Airport Marina Counseling Services. Welcome to Bi Guys, finally, Dr. Mimi Hoang.
Yay! I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's so nice to finally have you on the show. We've been trying and connecting and reconnecting, and I'm glad we're finally doing it. You've been a big part of this Bi movement, especially out here in Los Angeles, but in general too. You've been doing it for a while.
I have been doing it for a while, and I'm still doing it. And yeah, it's been so exciting to be able to meet you, Rob, and welcome to La La Land and the Bi+ community over here on the West Coast.
It's definitely been really nice moving. This is my second time relocating to LA. The first time was in 2010, and the second time was in 2020. Month before the pandemic. And the first time I was not out as bi and did not have like a community to come out and meet new people. And I felt very isolated in LA, and having it this time has been very nice. So before we get into all that, which I do want to get into, and I want to talk about the day we actually met in person, which was quite a lovely day at WeHo Pride. Let's start with you and your story, as we always do. So first, what pronouns do you use? I believe I've already used them, but I would like to ask you if you use any others, and how do you identify? What labels do you like on any spectrums you want to identify on?
Yeah. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a cisgender woman and identify as bisexual. I also love the term fluid. And queer, I use oftentimes as well as more of a community label. And I'm also Asian American, and specifically Chinese and Vietnamese ethnically. And I'm an immigrant. So, and I'll, share that, in terms of my journey, because I think it's relevant to my activist journey. So I was born originally in Vietnam, and I was born a little bit after the Vietnam War had ended. And so my family and I had to flee Vietnam due to, what was happening politically there. And I left, my homeland very young, came to the US very young. And my parents, they were refugees and had lost pretty much everything and had to start completely fresh in this new country, not speaking the language, or anything. So, the refugee experience is obviously different from a more typical immigrant experience where you've planned it, you've wanted it, and, you've gotten your ducks in a row and all of that. So, we really had to start from scratch. And we grew up, low income, on welfare, and, me speaking Cantonese, Vietnamese, and English growing up, and being
Wow.
raised by just, really traditional parents who really knew very little about LGBTQ issues. We were focused on surviving, making a living. I was a latchkey kid, growing up, taking care of my younger siblings, and, translating, for my parents and all of that, which is, I think a lot of other children of immigrants experience when they grow up. And so, when I started to kind of delve into my attractions and crushes and all of that, I just had no guidance. I really didn't know anybody else who was queer. And this was, before really the internet. And so, we were still checking out books at the library, and all of that. And so, of course, like, again, it just was something that I was dealing with by myself. I didn't have any sense of what was out there. I didn't even know that the word bisexual existed. At that
Mm-hmm.
time, I had heard gay, and it was always spoken of in a negative way. And so
Mm-hmm.
I just knew that it was bad to be gay or to be associated with being gay. So, when I had feelings and crushes and, fooled around with girls when I was younger, I just really felt like this is something I have to hide. It was really taboo. I didn't tell anybody, it was just something that I knew my parents wouldn't approve of, my community wouldn't approve of. So when I went to college, that's where I, went to a large university, UCLA. And of course, it's very progressive, and there's, lots of different, social groups and classes and things. And so I was minoring in women's studies, majored in psychology. And so this is when I started hearing about queer studies and queer issues. And I heard the word bisexual. And I like remember kind of perking up, like, wait, what? There's bisexual. But I was still just so repressed and closeted that I was afraid to really talk about it openly. Um, and so I actually was going through some depression when I was in college. I mean, not uncommon for
Mm-hmm.
us in the bi plus community. And I didn't know why I was depressed. Things on the surface seemed to be going well in my life. There was nothing that was wrong. But I was just like, why do I don't feel happy? There's just something happening. So I went to see a therapist at the counseling center at UCLA. And she was just so great and open and understanding. And I would start sort of dropping little hints that I, had thought about women, I, fantasized. And she was just really understanding, very patient with me. And finally, she's like, we have an LGBT mentoring program if you'd like to explore this a little bit more. And of course, I was deathly afraid of even kind of dipping my toe in that at the time. But she said, you know what, we have a grad student who is bisexual. She's Mexican American and also an immigrant, and has, sort of similar background as you. And so if you'd like, I'll bring her to our next session. And then you can just meet her and you can decide, no pressure. So to me, I was like, okay, that seems like no pressure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to come to my next session like I would. I don't have to do anything different yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so my next session, I met this, grad student mentor. Her name was Mariana, and she seemed really nice. And I was like, okay. She seems nice, and maybe I can continue talking to her. And so we started to meet up for coffee chats, and I, asked her a lot of questions at first, and then I started to open up and start talking about things that I just never shared, and I didn't even know what questions to ask. Because it was just
Hmm.
like this nebulous area. Like, what is this bisexuality area? And so she was such a wonderful mentor, like a big sister. And so I came out my senior year in college.
Cool.
And and it was, just this eye-opening thing, and my depression lifted.
Wow.
Yeah, and so, I use that example of my own life in terms of understanding, by mental health, right? And in terms of the importance of finding a therapist or clinician or mentor, whomever you're, who that you trust, who's maybe a little older, a little wiser than you, who can be affirming of who you are, all your aspects of queerness or transness or both. Um, and so that was, late college, and I was starting to get involved in some queer student groups. I joined an Asian American LGBTQ group called Mahu at the time, and I just felt so at home with my queer API brothers and sisters. And I graduated that summer, but then I was asked to lead a bisexual student group. It was the first time that UCLA had ever had that.
Hmm.
And so even though I had graduated, but they just didn't, they barely had any other out bi students.
Hmm.
So it was me plus another person who was a student, and we created Fluid at UCLA.
Cool.
And so we ran that, and I really met so many other, bi, pan, queer students, bi curious, students who were questioning. And I really started to learn so much more about the community and biphobia and dealing with, the gay world, the straight world, and all of that. And so that's when my leadership started in '99.
Cool.
Ran it for a couple years, and then I started grad school. I decided to get my PhD in clinical psychology. And so I moved down to San Diego to go to Alliant International University. And I got involved in some other queer, organizations there. But then I decided to transfer back to LA because I was looking for, the right advisor and more of a multicultural emphasis in my program.
Hmm.
So I did that, and I graduated from the LA campus of Alliant, and I finished my dissertation, which was on bi identity for women.
Cool.
Yeah. And so that then got me wanting to find the bi community in LA. And
Hmm.
BiNet LA was a social group back in the 80s and 90s. And I had attended a couple events when I was in college and all that, but they had disbanded by
Uh-huh.
the time that I finished grad school. And so I was like, we got to fix this. There's got to be some kind of bi group or entity in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
And so I put out a message on the listserv. There was like a bi listserv called Label, LABL, the LA Bisexual Listserv.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, right. And I said, does anyone want to meet up monthly for like a coffee chat? And so we met up. There was like around 10 of us. This was in 2006. And we got together and said, yeah, let's create a group. And what should we call it? And we decided to call it AmBi, which stood for a meeting of bi individuals.
Mm.
Yes, I see you have
Oh,
a t-shirt.
I'm wearing my shirt.
Yay. Yeah. So, we love our acronyms, we love our puns. And so it just felt like the perfect acronym. And so that was, our group. And we ran it and we met monthly and we tried to do everything. We had social events, coffee events, we did panels, we went to conferences, and we started marching in LA Pride. Um, and then in 2008, another bi leader, Joe Jerry Musari, approached me and said, "Do you want to help me start like more of a nonprofit group?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Sure." And so he and I and a few other leaders, we got together and we created the LA Bi Task Force. And so we decided that AmBi, at the time is how it was pronounced, would be a social group.
Uh-huh.
And the LA Bi Task Force would be like the educational nonprofit advocacy group. That way we don't have to do everything.
Mm-hmm. Except you
Yeah.
still had to do everything since you're involved in both. But...
I was involved in both, of course. But after a while, it got to be too much. And I also finished grad school and became licensed. And so I stepped away from the leadership of AmBi, which later then became rebranded as AmBi, pronounced like I am bi.
This was going to be one of my questions for you, because RJ pronounced it AmBi, but I was like, but it's bi, like I am bi, and I didn't
Yes.
know it was an acronym. Okay, so it's interesting that this pronunciation drama is also baked into the actual evolution of the organization.
Yes. Yes. Talk about sort of confusion, identity confusion.
It is a very bi thing to have two ways of pronouncing the group's
Isn't
name.
it? There you
Yeah.
go. Our group is bi in so many ways. But yes, so you may hear some people calling it AmBi, and some people, I think more the people who knew the earlier stages might
Right.
be calling it AmBi.
So they're not wrong. They're just honoring the legacy of the group.
Legacy, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I started to focus more on the LA Bi Task Force. And actually, we've recently also rebranded to the LA Bi Plus Task Force
Mm-hmm.
to be intentional of bi, pan, fluid, queer, omni identities under the whole umbrella, the non-monosexual umbrella. But so I became more focused on that, and that really helped me connect with leaders that were across the country, because we were doing more education and more advocacy and social justice efforts. And so this really helped us collaborate with, other amazing folks doing things in New York and Boston and Minneapolis and San Francisco, right? And so that's when the whole White House Bi roundtables started happening in 2013. And so that was just a phenomenal experience. It was, we were really trailblazing. And the first time that the White House was really recognizing the bisexual community.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I think they knew we existed, but we were always lumped in together with the L and the G and the T. And here we were, we got our own time, our own space to just talk about the B. And so at this amazing, groundbreaking meeting, we were split into groups to present on research and statistics impacting our community. I was assigned to the mental health portion just because of my, psychologist background. And we presented data. And there were other groups presenting on domestic violence, on substance abuse, on other health factors. And as we were each going up there presenting, we started noticing a pattern of all the data, which was that basically hetero people had better health or better outcomes than gay and lesbian people, which we're like, okay, we kind of like knew that. But the bisexual community was doing even worse than the gay community in all across the board. I mean, it was just consistent. So it was just really, staggering and obvious. And it really got me so concerned. And so when I came back to LA, I was like, we need to pay attention to this. Our community has the worst health indicators. We're more at risk of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, suicidality. And that's what led to the LA Task Force doing a community needs assessment in the greater LA community.
Oh,
And because we wanted to check in with our community.
yeah.
So we did do that. We were able to collect data. And
Yeah. What'd you learn from that? And when was that?
this was in 2015, and it is available on our website. But yes, we learned that the community is struggling with feeling connected.
Uh,
Connected to both, gay and lesbian communities and also straight communities. And we want to feel more connected to the gay and lesbian communities. We also asked about whether or not people were coming out to their health providers, both medical health and mental health providers. And some of them were. More people were coming out to their mental health providers than their medical health providers, which, kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
If you're taking the step to go to do that in the first place, hopefully you're aware enough that that's something important to talk about.
Exactly. You're going to talk about the emotional stuff and, maybe dating and all that.
Yeah, it's funny. You said when you first saw a therapist, you dropped a few hints. I think I wrote an email to the therapist ahead of time being like, I am questioning my sexuality. And I thought I would drop some hints when I got there. But when I got there, she goes, so in your email, you said you're questioning your sexuality. Let's talk about that. She knew that was the place to start. I was like,
fantastic.
Okay, all right, I guess I'll talk about that.
Yes. Well, whatever works. But yeah, I through this needs assessment, we asked about that, and we got so many comments that people were leaving about how their therapists or how their medical providers were reacting to finding out that they're bi. And there were some positive, experiences and responses. There were some that were kind of neutral, or maybe they didn't know very much. And so the person felt like they had to educate their provider. But then there were a lot of comments about biphobic responses, thinking it was the same thing as being gay or lesbian, dismissing it, or even over medicating. Yeah. And so as a psychologist, this obviously really concerned me. And so that's when I started to really focus more on training other mental health providers, and helping professionals in general. And so I started to provide more continuing education, more workshops and clinical trainings. And, a few years later, that's when I launched my Bi on Life self-empowerment series, because I wanted to not only work with the providers, but I wanted to sort of marry my activist hat and my clinical hat together, into this series that would be a blend of coaching, a blend of education, and really using myself, but also using my clinical background. And so I ran that, and that was, really great. The pandemic hit, so it did put a pause on that, plus many other things. But this is still something that I, want to pursue, is really to uplift my community.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, when you marry the things about you that are both important to your identity and also that you have a lot of training and experience and knowledge in, well, that's when you're doing something really great that, no one else could be doing, right? And that's very powerful.
I hope so.
Yeah. And now, a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. When I was first recognizing my bisexuality and coming to terms with it, I thought it was something I would take to the grave and never tell anyone. I was very stuck focusing on problems instead of solutions. I was very wrapped up in fear of what would happen if I came out. And I was not really thinking of all the joy and positive changes that would come from coming out. One of the things that really changed things for me was therapy and finding a therapist. It's helped me to stop focusing on those fears, and it's helped me to be more authentic, get in touch with my feelings, speak my truth, and relate and communicate better with other people. There's this perception that if you see a therapist, it means something's, quote, wrong. I totally disagree. I think everyone can benefit from talk therapy. So if you are thinking of giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. Full disclosure, I have not tried BetterHelp myself. I already have a therapist for many years who I love, but BetterHelp is great for many people. It's convenient, it's accessible, it's affordable, and it's entirely online. When you go to BetterHelp.com, you get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey, and you can switch therapists anytime. When you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit BetterHelp.com/2ByGuys today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/2ByGuys. And now a word from our sponsor and podcasting platform, Zencastr. Creating and producing your own podcast can be challenging, as I know. I pretty much do everything from start to finish. Podcasting can sometimes mean opening 14 different tabs so that you can record, edit, publish, monetize, listen. But since I've used Zencastr, everything has been much more streamlined. Creating a quality podcast no longer has to involve a dozen different apps strung together on disparate platforms. Zencastr's modern podcasting stack allows you to do everything you need for your podcast, from recording to publishing, all in one place. Since I've switched to Zencastr, it's been super easy. It's also super easy for my guests to come in and join for an episode. Everything is right there in the web browser. And now Zencastr is adding even more features for video podcasting, which I've heard is the way of the future. Zencastr now, in addition to the best quality sound, which is why I chose Zencastr in the first place, Zencastr also records video up to 4K to give you the picture-perfect quality that your video podcast deserves. And they can distribute your video podcast in 1080p to all available video podcast players. Plus, now you can also add your own custom watermark and brand your content. I gotta try that. It's a new feature. We haven't done it yet, but we will soon. And if you've watched our social media, you can see the quality. It's great. I highly recommend Zencastr. I think it's super easy to use. It's reasonably priced. If you're interested in podcasting or recording audio and video with Zencastr, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code 2ByGuys1, the number 1, and you'll get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. That's zencastr.com/pricing and use the promo code 2ByGuys1, TWOBIGUIS, the number 1. I want you to have the same easy experience as I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story with Zencastr. So you've literally gone through all of my questions and answered everything. So now we can dig in even deeper. Literally, my final question was, what did you do at the White House? And tell us all about that. But I have follow-ups for everything, and everything you said sparked some stuff in me. I want to go back to you first, if you don't mind, because
Sure.
I think it's really quite remarkable that you left Vietnam at a young age, and like within your own lifetime, at like one generation went from sort of survival mode to thriving and self-actualization and being able to focus on this part of you, and like even when you came here, like it was different than it is today, where you didn't see stuff, you didn't hear about bisexuality. I mean, you kind of explained this, but I guess I'm curious, like, you were in a nice position where they set you up with a mentor and somebody noticed this and you heard the word bi, but like, what do you think was really, the tipping point for you? And like, I don't know, were you anxious? Was it hard to do this? I don't know what my
Oh,
question is.
yes.
How did
Yeah.
you
I
do it?
mean, how did I do it? Yeah. I mean, I've thought about this a lot because, it's about how was I resilient,
Yeah, yeah.
right? How did I overcome all these odds, all these challenges, all this invisibility and erasure and oppression, right? As a woman of color, as an immigrant, as a first generation college student. And I think in some ways, me being a latchkey kid um, really developed a sense of independence and learning to speak up when I had to. My parents were they were survivors, and I saw how they were resourceful, how they worked multiple jobs and, overcame so much. So seeing that was just really inspiring. And then me developing my own leadership, when I was in high school, I was in, student government. And so I was already sort of this like little leader.
Hmm.
um, um, and in some ways it was great. In some ways it made it harder because when I was imagining coming out, it was like, wow, if I come out and I'm already known, like well known, this is going to be really a big deal, right?
Hmm.
And so I think in some ways, me being able to go ask for help, obviously I was a psych major, so I already was, familiar with the idea of a therapist. Um, so going to see somebody and asking for help, I think is such an important a part of coping and, not going it alone, right?
Hmm.
And I think in growing up in an Asian American immigrant community, I learned about collectivism and community and the importance of strength in numbers. And so, in all the important steps that I took in my activism, it was about creating community,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Fluid at UCLA, AmBi or AmBi, and then later the LA Task Force. I never did this alone. It was always with other people so that we could count on each other. And so these are things that I tell other people is don't go it alone, ask for help, find mentors or find an affirmative therapist. Um, and that will help you.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think part of why I didn't realize it until a little later in life was because I had this very independent sort of mindset growing up, and I definitely grew up with the idea that therapy means you're fixing something that's wrong, which is not the case. What I learned when I got to therapy was like it doesn't mean there's anything wrong at all. In fact, like going there and being able to be vulnerable and accept that you need some help is a sign of strength and is just like
Absolutely.
great for anyone to have someone to talk to about whatever without like I don't know what the word I'm
Judgment.
thinking of is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right. No, exactly. And it's funny, I was on student government too, and I think I had that same fear of like desire to fit in. I
Mhm.
so I want to get to the community thing in a second, but you also mentioned this like resilience you had, and how can people develop that kind of resilience? Like, what if you're so scared of all this stuff we're talking about? Like, how can you cultivate that, or how do you work with your clients on cultivating that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it takes small steps, and there's not a one size fits all. But I think fortunately nowadays there is the internet and social media. There's so much information that you can find. Hopefully, people are finding trusted and accurate information. And fortunately, right now, I think there's more and more visibility of different bi groups and pan groups and influencers and leaders and celebrities are coming out. So there's a lot more ways to get information, even if you're not out and even if you're not in therapy already. If you are in therapy, bring it up. like you did. It could be in a very bold, splashy way, or
Yeah.
like me in a shy, dropping hints way.
Hmm.
And hopefully, your therapist is going to respond well and help you explore. And hopefully, they have some education on it. Even if they don't, if they're willing to learn and educate themselves, that's great. If they're really not, and they're starting to say things that seem questionable or even are microaggressions, then bring it up if you feel brave enough, or change therapists. I think
Hmm.
people don't realize that you can actually change therapists, just like you can change your doctor. And there are, LGBTQ affirmative therapists. I have a therapist referral list here in Southern Cal if people want to contact me. But there are many more agencies now that are training specifically affirmative therapists. And so that's another way to go about it. But take it step by step. And, I've been focusing more and more on bi wellness.
Yeah.
I think after that White House experience, we've been talking lots and lots about like the sad statistics, right? Like, all the rates of depression and all the biphobia that's happening and everything. And it's good to know, but I also want to work on the positive psychology,
Right.
which is kind of what we're talking about, right? Which is not
Yeah.
just what makes us unwell, but what makes us well,
Right. Well,
right?
when I first sort of got into this community and went to my first bi request meeting in New York, like these things come up a lot. Bi people have worse mental health outcomes and worse physical health outcomes and are isolated and all these like negative things. And right, it is important to know. And thankfully, at the same time, I was finding this community which affirmed me, but it was sort of like a little mental gymnastics. And so yes, let's talk about like given the statistics which we have talked about on this podcast many times, how do we cultivate bi wellness? And there are things that are hard for me, but coming out and embracing my biness and actually really cherishing it has had such a positive impact in my life, and I see the world in this new beautiful way now that like makes so much more sense to me. For all the struggles, it's brought a lot of joy and positivity into my life. So has it done that for you, and what are some positive aspects of this identity, and how do we cultivate that as a community?
Yes. Well, I love to talk about that because it is so important. And I think you and I, in some ways, have intuitively maybe done some of the things that I'm, sort of like thinking more about. And it actually relates to my dissertation.
Mm.
So when I was in grad school, I wanted to study more about bi identity and internalized biphobia. And what I found was that there was a direct correlation. And when you look at bi identity, I was looking at bi identity congruence. So that's kind of a more nerdy, sciencey term. But when you have more congruence in your identity, meaning that the different parts of your sexuality, your attractions, your fantasies, your behaviors, your identity, when that is more congruent, you actually have lower internalized biphobia. And this was
Mm.
among women in my study. You may have heard of cognitive dissonance theory, where when your thoughts and your feelings and your actions are all matching, there's less tension or less dissonance, right?
Hmm.
So if I say I'm on a diet, I'm just going to throw that out there, but then I'm eating a bunch of cookies, right? It's like, okay, wait, am I on my diet? Like, am I, in line, right?
Hmm.
And so when those different parts of you are matching, there's less tension. And so congruence is similar. So when your bisexual identity is matching, my my sort of guess here is that you're going to have less tension and less depression and anxiety. And when does this happen more? When does this internal tension of where you're mismatched between your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors? Probably in long-term monogamous relationships,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you're single, or if you're kind of dating around, or if you're polyamorous or in consensual, uh, non-monogamous relationships, you're probably activating sort of the different attractions, the different behaviors, and all of that. But when you're monogamous, right, you're only with one partner, and in a long term relationship, you're going to maybe fall into a hetero kind of a life
Mm-hmm.
and a community, an identity, even, or a gay life or community or identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, my guess is that this happens a little bit more heavily when you're with an other sex partner, right? Because then you're in this sort of hetero passing relationship. Your partner's probably hetero. They may not be, but they may be hetero passing. And so now you're feeling really invisible, and there's just all this erasure. And there are studies out there sort of supporting some of my ideas, studies on bi women specifically, but that bi women in other sex relationships tend to have poor mental health
Hmm.
than bi women in same sex relationships.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there's more rejection and exclusion from the gay community, which, I mean, that makes
Def-
sense.
Definitely seen a lot of that, even today on Twitter, a lot of like harassment toward people who call themselves queer but are in a quote straight
Yes.
relationship. But of course we are.
Yes. Yes. So, you're feeling booted out, you're feeling dismissed, questioned. By women in same sex relationships, we get our own flack too. I mean, I'm married to a woman, so I'm kind of speaking from that. Um, but we're more out just as a result of being in a same sex relationship, right? We can't sort of pass as hetero, but there's a little bit more mislabeling. There's more direct facing of homophobia,
Mm-hmm.
because now you're in a gay passing relationship. So this, I've seen these statistics. I've heard of this through my clients and from friends, and just also my own lived experiences when I was dating men before. Um, and so, how do we become more congruent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of this question that I've been grappling with. And
Mm-hmm.
my idea is to make your insides match your outsides, kind of simplistically. It's a little bit similar to trans people,
Mm-hmm.
and where your internal sense of your gender, matches your external sense of your gender,
Mm-hmm.
right? But for bi and pan people, we kind of, I think, go through something similar where maybe it's in our head, our attractions are in our head, our crushes and our fantasies are in our head, but we're not actually living it out. We're not speaking about it, we're not expressing it. And even if we have a partner who is supportive or neutral, we just might not be talking about it, you know
Yeah.
we sometimes sort of like we suppress ourselves, right? And so could there be ways to really speak about it more, like, let's say you're a bi woman with a male partner. Do you speak about crushes, celebrities, that you are crushing on, or maybe mentioning your ex-girlfriends, or expressing yourself through your clothing, hair and makeup, even that just feels like you, or engaging in bi or queer culture, right?
Yeah.
Shows, movies, going to Pride, going to a community group, all those things, right? And likewise, if you're a bi man, like, and you're with a woman, first of all, are you out to her? Because bi men tend to be less out than bi women,
Yep.
right? But if you are out, do you speak about crushes on men, or mentions of ex-boyfriends, or do you dress yourself or express yourself in the way that you really want? And do you engage in bi or queer culture?
Right.
Do you listen to the Two Bi Guys podcast, for example?
Exactly. Hope so. Right.
Right, right. And so these are the questions that I think people maybe are thinking about, maybe are already doing, but aren't aware that they're doing it. I think those of us that are activists, we automatically have that outlet. We are doing projects, we're doing podcasts, workshops.
Right.
We're talking to other bi leaders. We're emailing each other. We're reading articles. We're paying attention to these things. So those things are active in our life, and that makes us feel congruent,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. I,
So yeah,
well, I remember when right before I came out and as I was coming out, like really noticing how when I started coming out, how free I was to speak my mind at any moment. And even just like watching TV, I would have a thought about a scene or a character that I was able to say now that the person next to me knew. Whereas, like, I was censoring myself so much before and basically didn't realize it or thought it was normal to censor myself all the time and so when I started coming out, I came out real fast. Like I had a list and I went down it, and I think I didn't really know why I was so eager to do it, but in hindsight it was like so that I could be myself around all the people I care about. and
yeah,
I and I didn't even fully realize how much I hadn't been my total self beforehand. So it
yes.
makes a lot of sense what you're saying.
Absolutely. You are trying to reach that congruence, that outness, that authenticity where your insides matched your outsides. And now you could be open with your friends. Like if you're dating a partner of a certain gender, you don't have to change the pronoun,
Yeah.
or hide the pronoun. You can bring your date around, you know. You can talk about bi pride stuff, right? And that's,
Right.
going to entail also another set of skills is dealing with microaggressions and dealing with questions or comments or things like that, right? But it's a start, right? It's really engaging.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think those microaggressions were also much harder for me to even notice when I wasn't out. I just kind of almost gaslit myself and thought all that stuff was normal and told myself like those people must have a point. Instead of now, I'm very like when I hear something biphobic, my alarm bells go off right away, and I just know not to get sucked into that way of thinking. But until you're around people that normalize this sexuality, it's really hard to do that on your own.
Absolutely, and when you have awareness even that something is a microaggression, right? I think just the act of that, you are not internalizing it. You
Right.
can see it as an act where it's toxic, and you can call it that. And then you can figure out a way to deal with that instead of just assuming, oh, well, they are speaking the truth about me, right?
Right. That's what I assumed for so long, that like, oh, people must know how the world is, and I must be the one that's confused.
Mm-hmm.
And now I understand that just because a lot of people think something doesn't mean they're right.
Exactly, exactly. I think it's mostly other people that are confused about
Yeah.
us. Yeah. So, I just want to say too, I'm not trying to exclude bi and pan non-binary people out there. I think there's unfortunately just so little research, out there, but I do think that in some ways being trans or non-binary, it adds a layer of outness and queerness that you're already thinking about, grappling with. And so for those of us that are cisgender, we don't have that. So we sort of blend ourselves in with the
Yeah.
mainstream culture as a result. So in a way, it's a disadvantage that we're not already thinking about our gender identity. But, I do think that when we're with monosexual partners, that this is really important to find someone who's really supportive of you,
Yeah.
who's supportive of your bi or pansexuality and doesn't fight against it, doesn't question it or control it. Worst thing is to control it or abuse it, but they actually appreciate it and maybe even go with you to events. My wife, we've been married now 9 years, together 13 years. And she's just an amazing ally. She's a lesbian, cis woman, and she's just, I call her the biggest bi ally because, obviously I have, my professional bisexual career but she comes with me to community events and people know her. And it's just a normal part of our life,
Yeah.
And so, I think it's important for people to ask themselves, do you involve your partner, or do you try to also compartmentalize that?
Right.
It's like if I go to this bi or this gay thing, I can't bring my partner, but why not?
Right. This episode of Two Bi Guys is sponsored by Hinge, the dating app that believes anyone looking for love should be able to find it. Navigating the world of queer dating can be difficult. It is exciting, but it does come with lots of challenges, especially for bi, fluid, pan, queer people. It's complicated, and there are not that many resources out there. That's part of why we created this podcast. And we always get messages to our social media account from listeners who have questions about dating, questions about gender and sexuality. A lot of people ask things like, I'm new to dating someone of the same gender, or I'm new to dating someone of a different gender. And I do try to respond to every message we get. If I've missed yours, I apologize, but I do respond to most of them. But, I'm only one person. I only have my experience, and the more resources, the better. So, to help our community navigate the complicated world of LGBTQIA plus dating, Hinge is bringing you Not So Frequently Asked Questions, or NFAQ. It's answers to LGBTQIA plus questions not talked about enough. There are lots of community submitted questions on there. You can go and submit your own questions. The responses to these not so frequently asked questions come from diverse creators in the queer community. To learn more and hear different perspectives on these not so frequently asked questions, go to hinge.nfaq.co. That's hinge.nfaq.co. I'd like to thank Tracy's Dog for sponsoring this episode of Two Bi Guys. Tracy's Dog is a maker of all kinds of sex toys to spice up your and your partner's love life. You've probably had plenty of clitoral orgasms. I know I have. You may have even experienced some G-spot orgasms. Those are great too. Both are pretty damn good in their own right. But now imagine if you could experience both at the same time in one phenomenal fireworks-like finale. And you can have it whenever you're in the mood. Now you can. Tracy's Dog brings you the OG Flow, a double pleasure device that lets you experience blended orgasms on your own or during a foreplay session with your partner. The sucking stimulator delivers nice, soft-lipped sucking sensations, while the flexible shaft delivers precisely targeted vibrations to your internal pleasure spots. It will totally blow your mind. And I will say, I was kidding about me personally having clitoral orgasms, but even for men, there are different types of orgasms you can have depending on what you're stimulating. A prostate orgasm, if you've never had one with your prostate stimulated, it's really great. I highly recommend recommend it. And I really recommend everyone trying out different sex toys, especially if you never have. It really may totally blow your mind. So, if you're interested in all these types of orgasms we're talking about, go to tracysdog.com. That's TRACYSDOG.com to order Tracy's Dog OG Flow today. And if you use the promo code 2BYGUYS, you can get 15% off. And before you use the OG Flow, make sure to get some towels ready at your side. Trust me, you're going to need them. Can I ask about your partnership? Like, when you first met each other, were you out already? How did your bisexuality come into play over the evolution of your relationship?
Oh yeah, I was already out. I was already a major activist. And so I think she just sort of knew that about me. I mean, it's not like she had heard about me, but I just sort of talked about it as a part of like who I am and my hobbies and volunteering and things like that. With previous partners, for me earlier in my journey, I would also be open with them, pretty early on. So I never hid it, from my partners. And, a thing also, I remember sort of talking about being with male partners because I remember when I had boyfriends that I purposely, and I didn't know why I did this, but I purposely sort of dressed more edgy and androgynous. I had super short hair and I always wore a rainbow bracelet. And I realize now, like, why I was doing it, because for me, that helped me feel congruent.
Mm-hmm.
That it was kind of like this concrete, visible reminder that I'm not straight.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, some of my quote unquote straight boyfriends later came out as bi. I mean,
Of course.
surprise, surprise. Um, but it just having that little like queer symbol or like sort of the way I dressed, it just made me feel more me,
Yeah.
when I had male partners. So, I've heard some similar things from other folks. I don't know if you've had, similar experiences or heard of them, but I
Yeah.
think these are ways that we try to, match like what we're doing with what we're feeling and thinking.
Right. And even if you're not like explicitly out to everyone, these bi-identifiers can be important just to sort of signal, hey, I'm not conforming in some way. Like I remember my last couple years at work at SVU where I wasn't out to people. I came out basically right around the time I left the show, but I had these like really bright pinkish orangish sneakers that for years I had worn like brown and gray shoes and whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then I got these and like I loved them. I think I was starting to come out in my head but not ready to tell people, and I loved the sneakers, and like a lot of people would comment on them and say nice shoes, or like I can't hear you, those shoes are so bright. And I liked that. I liked sort of walking down the hall and having something that stood out. And when I did finally come out more publicly, I put a bi pin on my backpack, and I just, even sitting on the subway, I liked having that, and I didn't have to talk to people on the subway, but like if they knew, then they knew and they could see. And so yes, I've had that experience.
Yeah, totally. It could be like a quiet or subtle way. It could be a bisexual t-shirt or hat,
Right.
obviously something if you want to be super explicit. But yeah, it could be something subtle. And then it creates kind of this opening conversation.
Right.
And maybe that could lead to you actually coming out.
Exactly. Right. It can be the conversation starter. And also, like, speaking of congruence, like that tracks for me too, because, and with mental health, like, because there was probably about a year where I was calling myself straight and not out to anyone but having sex with men. And so that was like probably the most, whatever the opposite of the most cognitive dissonance I ever felt, the least
Yes.
congruent, because it was really weighed on me, like how can I say these words and then be doing this stuff? And the things I was doing I was enjoying, and so I was that like I didn't feel shame doing it. So then I was like, but then why can't I say it? Why am I ashamed to tell people about this? And that was the hardest time. And it in at that time it seemed like coming out would be the hardest thing, but actually it was hard to get there, but it made everything much easier and much nicer. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely what happens, is we feel the weight of being incongruent. There's, that box that we're in. And
Yeah.
once you come out, it's so freeing.
Yeah. Cool. Has your bi identity changed over time for you? Like what it was about at the beginning? Is it something different now, or is it kind of the same and you're more comfortable with it? Or like I don't know, how has it evolved for you?
Um, that's a great question. I don't know if people have actually asked me that, but yeah, I think that my identifier has always been bisexual. And I like fluid also because, to me, bisexual does sound a little bit like clinical sometimes.
Hmm.
And fluid to me just feels a little bit more like encompassing of like change and fluctuations.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I have noticed that, when I was unmarried and kind of dating and having different partners, that sometimes I'd be more boy crazy or more girl crazy and whatnot. So, I think that that's been, part of that journey. But, outwardly, I still use bisexual. And, I think it's so important to have that historical reference too. I know that there's other newer terms, within the umbrella, but I'm glad to see that people are reclaiming bisexual. I
Hmm.
think there's just been so many misconceptions about
Yeah.
what it means, that it has to be 50-50. And so I also, through my social media, I educate people around some of the nuances around identifications. And I think that, it's been really well received. People have really been resonating with that. And, it really shows how diverse we are, right?
Hmm.
That, you can be under the bi plus umbrella or bisexual label even, and you can have varying degrees of different ways that you feel desire. And so that's just been a wonderful arc that I've seen.
Yeah.
It's been so great seeing the younger generation being more out and talking about it more and doing TikToks, about their bisexuality. And so this is just so, so wonderful to see that, in my life where I'm seeing people younger than me and I'm learning from them. So
Hmm.
that just is just super exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, it is becoming so much more normalized and prevalent in younger generations, which is nice. Very nice to see. And like the bi plus community is so diverse, which is sort of like it's a blessing. It's what makes it really special and unique. It also makes it a challenge sometimes to organize and find each other and not get caught up in the label discussions and get to the next level of like what we have in common and our collective oppression and things like that. So double-edged sword. Okay, so last thing, I want to talk about the day we finally met, which was in June of this year.
Yes.
I hope it's this year that I put out this episode, probably. So we met at the WeHo Pride Parade. I showed up at the very last minute, right before we started, and somehow got to pull the unicorn. But
You
it
were
was a lovely day.
fashionably late.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It was a lovely day, but tell us about your experience of that day and how it relates to other pride parades you've been in, back when you started doing the activist work?
Yeah, well, it's that's been quite a journey as well, because I've lived in LA for so long, and I had never seen a bi contingent at the LA Pride Parade. And so when I started up, AmBi at the time called AmBi, which was 2006, we were starting to talk about like, should we gather a group and march in LA Pride? And we were not just we just weren't organized enough, and we didn't know how to apply and to do all that. So in 2007, I was like, let's just wear bi t-shirts and stand on the side, and we'll have a sidewalk contingent. We'll start there, right?
Start
Like
somewhere, yeah.
baby steps, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to have your baby steps. So it was four of us, and we all wore bi shirts. We were so nervous. We were so nervous to wear t shirts at Pride. I mean, if you can believe that. But because we were doing it together, again, strength in numbers, we felt better just all standing together. And so we took pictures of ourselves standing there, and we said, next year we're going to look into how to get into LA Pride. And we did. So it was 2008, and we were able to gather, I think it was a little under 15 people. And we all wore purple shirts because that was, kind of the color that represents bisexuality on the Bi Pride flag. We made signs, different bi pride slogans, and we got together and we marched. And it was positive for the most part. I think we were just really excited to be doing it. We did get some boos and jeers, unfortunately. There were just some really biphobic gay people that didn't like that we were there and that we were being out. And so I heard things like pick a side. But I was
At Pride. It's wild. That's
right, where it's
just,
supposed to be about love and
yeah,
acceptance and celebration.
wild.
But because I'd already been doing this, this work for years, and so I wasn't surprised. I didn't, catch me off guard, and I just knew that I just needed to stay strong and hold my head up high, and that it wasn't going to change anything about me or about us, and I was just so proud that we were there in this parade. And it's just such an exhilarating experience, right? When you're marching in this parade, and there's just so much, rainbows and glitter, and it's just so happy. And so that was 2008. And then ever since then, we've been marching at LA Pride. Our contingents have grown bigger. They've grown more elaborate. Later, AmBi, had flatbed trucks with go-go dancers and,
Ooh.
Amazing things, and even celebrities. And so it just, it took little by little, and organizing, and people feeling more and more proud as they were marching, and people would come up to me and they say, thank you so much for organizing this. It has been such a happy and exciting day to be in Pride. And we also heard that people who had previously identified as gay, after seeing us at LA Pride, started to come out as bi. So it's like when you are out, not only are you helping your own mental health, but you are helping other people. You are shining the light, and that's what I say, being like a bi beacon. You're signaling out to people that are feeling lonely, that are struggling, that are unsure of themselves. And they're like, oh, look, there's a person who is out and they feel okay, and they seem to be doing okay. Maybe I can be like that person.
Right.
So this is why I continue to do what I do. And this is why I continue marching.
That's so awesome. And Robin Oakes also talked on the podcast about this idea of being a bi beacon because, like, right, you don't know and who it could help and affect, and you may never see it, but it's definitely happening. And like, I just think doing the Pride Parade, like, you see all these bi flags sporadically in the crowd, and it's so fun when
Yes,
they catch your eye and they see a bi group and they get all excited. I mean, that part is so fun.
totally. And we never used to see that in the beginning. In the
Uh-huh.
beginning, we were the only bi flag,
Hmm.
right? But now you can see it in the audience, in the sidelines, so many
There were
bi
so
and
many.
pan flags. And it
Yeah.
just, my heart was swelling just every time.
There were so many. I mean, every 20 feet, at least one, and sometimes many. And but then also there, there's people in the crowd who are not necessarily cheering for us going crazy or not necessarily have a bi flag of their own, but who notice it and may think or may not have seen a bi group like that, or that 20 bi people in
Absolutely.
one place together.
Yes,
And
holding a
so
50-foot bi flag.
yeah, right. And so who knows? And I also noticed this time a lot of groups of women, not with bi flags, but like groups of girlfriends who also got so excited when we passed. And so people may not always have an outward identifier, but I could tell they were connecting with the giant bi flag as we went
Maybe
by.
some baby buys.
Yeah.
Yes. And even folks who are non bi were cheering for us. And
Yeah.
that just felt so wonderful, so amazing.
Yeah.
And so that's the part that's just so rewarding, to know and see the efforts of all the leaders, on the shoulders that I've stood on, and the younger leaders that have come, after me, that we are all creating change.
Yeah. That's awesome. And, we obviously there's always work to do and we still have ways to go, but it's already changed so much from 2008 to now. There's already so many more bi flags. I didn't hear any biphobia. And like you said, we got solidarity from other letters in LGBT plus. And so that, that's in large part to the work that you've done in LA and broader. And so thank you for all the work that you've done to get us to this point. This has been a lovely, lovely chat. It's great. I'm so glad we got to finally do it. If you are listening and aren't already following Dr. Mimi, you should be. She's on Instagram at Dr. Mimi Hoang, Dr. Dr. Hoang is Hoang. You can also visit her website. It's drmimihuang.com. And then we'll also post the link with all the resources, which I just think is such a great resource. Anything else you want to plug before we go?
That's it. Follow me. I'm also on Facebook for those of you that are on Facebook, the older Gen Xers
Right.
like me. Yeah, and stay tuned to new programs.
Yes, Mimi also has a great newsletter that I get promoting programs from LA Plus by Task Force, AmBi, and we've been on panels together. I hosted one you were on, you hosted one that I was on. So get on that newsletter and build your bi community. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Dr. Mimi Huang. This was great.
Thank you.
Two Bi Guys is produced and edited by me, Rob Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our logo art is by Caitlin Weinman. Our music is by Ross Mincer. We are supported by the Gotham, and we are part of the Zencastr Creator Network. Use promo code 2BiGuys to get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr. Thanks for listening to 2 Bi Guys.